study. Some cartoon characters are called autism-coded, which means fans speculate they're on the autism spectrum because they display common autism traits. But they're not officially confirmed as on the spectrum in the show they're on. These include characters like Phillip J Fry from Futurama, Butters from South Park, Tina Belcher from Bob's Burgers, or Hank Hill. But other cartoon characters have been confirmed autistic, either confirmed in their cartoon story or in real life by the show's creators, sometimes in retrospect. These include characters like Spongebob or Rick from Rick and Morty. Whether they're confirmed or not, today we'll discuss both autism-coded and autism-confirmed cartoon characters.
She's autistic, she can't help it.
Yeah, I'm autistic.
I'm on the spectrum.
We'll look at suggestions from my community, who are 85% neurodivergent and 57% on the spectrum, and I'll try my best to use reliable sources to determine if these characters might be on the spectrum, such as the DSM-5 Autism Diagnostic Criteria, which sounds very official, the National Library of Medicine, and autism specialists such as Professor Tony Atwood, and my own personal perspective, being on the spectrum myself. Plus, my mum will also give her perspective, who has over 40 years of experience working with kids on the spectrum.
Hello, good to be back.
Hi, Mom. Obviously, the goal here isn't to force labels onto every clever, quirky, or shy cartoon character, but real people on the spectrum can sometimes better understand their own autistic traits through these characters. Plus, there's a depressingly small number of popular cartoon characters who have been officially acknowledged as autistic. So for decades, we've kinda just had to speculate in order to have any representation whatsoever. Hopefully we might learn a bit about neurodivergency and, hey, maybe a bit about ourselves. With all that said, let's begin. Our first choice is Spongebob. For a long time, Spongebob was autism-coded by many people, but he was later confirmed as on the autism spectrum by the show's voice director and the voice of Spongebob, Tom Kenny.
Is SpongeBob autistic? Wow. Is SpongeBob himself autistic? Right. And I said, yes, of course.
And when we look closer, it does make a lot of sense. Of the 3 autism levels, he's probably autism level 1, not requiring a lot of support on a daily basis, beyond what Mr. Krabs gives him in the workplace, which honestly isn't much. But Mr. Krabs does offer him routine and structure in the Krusty Krab, which can be appreciated by many people on the spectrum. The DSM-5 mentions that autistic people can show ritualized or rigid behavior patterns, and I think we could call SpongeBob's daily routine at the Krusty Krab pretty rigid. As notorious as the episode SpongeBob You're Fired is, it also shows SpongeBob's severe reaction to change in his routine.
I'm just going to make a few changes to the Krusty Krab menu, that's all.
Changes?
And according to Professor Tony Atwood, struggling to cope with change is a frequent symptom of being on the spectrum.
No more Krabby Patties.
Oh my God,
I think SpongeBob can also show a lack of understanding of social cues. We see this a lot earlier in the series in episodes like Ripped Pants, where he doesn't quite get that repeatedly ripping his pants isn't exactly a socially acceptable way to fit in. And personally, yeah, I totally get that. I was very similar to this in school. Often I'd be the class clown because it got people to laugh, just like they do at SpongeBob's ripped pants. Another example is Spongy's lack of understanding of Squidward's emotions. Over the years, Squidward has been repeatedly furious at him, but Spongy often struggles to fully register Squidward's anger and just can't read his very clear facial expressions and tone of voice. Often Spongy has just talked at Squidward without fully registering what Squiddy is saying. And what do you know? Difficulty with reading body language is another common autism trait Tony mentioned. I mean, SpongeBob clearly wants to be Squidward's friend, but he just can't read him. And as we can see on the DSM-5, a common trait of autism spectrum is restrictive and repetitive interests. And yeah, I'd say SpongeBob shows this in his love of being a fast food worker. He is very fixated on ensuring every burger is perfect and giving a good experience to every customer. And he seems to thrive on this routine of working there every day. In fact, he can get very upset when that routine is interrupted. Another good example of his fixated interests is Employee of the Month, where he gets a lot of anxiety from the idea of not being able to be Employee of the Month for like the 43rd time in a row. I also tend to think of SpongeBob's iconic laugh. as it reminds me of two common traits in autism: repetitive behaviors, and once again, a lack of social understanding. This is because he sometimes laughs at inappropriate times, and he repeatedly laughs this way. Another autism trait is challenges in emotional regulation. I've certainly struggled with this over the years myself, and sometimes we can see Spongy's emotional regulation really out of whack. According to this article from the National Library of Medicine,
traits of autism may interfere with emotional regulation. It is also common to have trouble identifying and describing emotions.
a good example of his emotional regulation struggles is in boating school. Ask Mrs. Puff, she would probably be the first person to identify SpongeBob as on the autism spectrum. It's safe to say Spongy has really struggled in boating school. When he actually steps into the boat for driving, he'll often stop taking in stimuli and basically shut down, unable to take any directions from Mrs. Puff's.
Floor it?
No, don't floor it.
Okay, floor it.
He often even has an anxiety attack while trying to drive. In Spongiac, Mr. Krabs' comments make him so anxious that he can't sleep all night, getting completely wrapped up in his own thoughts. On a personal note, I've noticed that many people on the spectrum are uncomfortable sleeping in the dark, so I also tend to think of SpongeBob in the Nightlight episode, where he can't sleep in the dark. And sometimes SpongeBob just doesn't do socially normal behavior. For example, in the episode Dying for Pie, SpongeBob walks around holding Squidward's hand, telling people,
Hi, I want to show you my best friend, Squidward.
Hey, Frank.
Another thing I've noticed is that SpongeBob has a pretty limited friend group of basically two people, Patrick and Sandy. I guess 3 friends if you count his pet Gary.
SpongeBob thinks he has lots of other friends, but actually they're just acquaintances. But he chooses to see them as friends.
Exactly, he makes a lot of acquaintances and has work colleagues like Squidward, but Spongy seems to struggle with finding people that would comfortably call him a friend. Often in early seasons, SpongeBob is just trying hard to fit in. He started season 1 with just his friend Patrick, who he loves to hang out with, but he doesn't really seem to get him. To be fair, I don't think Patrick gets much of anything, but you could argue they have a pretty superficial friendship, mostly based on shared interests. It was a big deal for SpongeBob to try and make a new friend when he met Sandy. When she invites him over in Tea at the Tree Dome, he simply doesn't know how to act at all, and what's socially acceptable to say. He doesn't even realize it's okay for him to say that he can't breathe air.
Among his friends, it seems like Sandy is the only one who really gets who SpongeBob is.
Yeah, and I'm not saying Patrick isn't a friend who SpongeBob spends a whole lot of time with, but he's just not bright enough to really get who SpongeBob is. We can also see with Spongy that he's definitely not introverted, but not every person on the spectrum is. Some people assume that all autistic people are introverted, but as Dr. Michelle Garnett mentions here, a person on the spectrum can be both introverted or extroverted, and I would definitely call SpongeBob extroverted.
He's extroverted, but he doesn't fully grasp all the social cues around him. Mr. Krabs in many ways takes advantage of SpongeBob because SpongeBob chooses to treat every customer and person with friendliness and happiness.
And even after all these years, he'll continually be surprised when people like Krabs do the most morally reprehensible thing possible, without fail. Jeepers, I really relate to that.
SpongeBob is choosing not to follow social patterns that he's not comfortable with. They're not part of him. He chooses to be a kind person all the time. Even when people are rude to him, like Squidward, he chooses to respond in a kind and happy way.
While we're talking about Spongy, it's also worth mentioning that Patchy the Pirate is very likely autistic as well. He's both the president of the SpongeBob fan club and the voice of SpongeBob. If we look at his room, we can see he has very rigid interests and doesn't really pay attention to social cues. Patchy and SpongeBob are both a delight to me in just how much they are unabashedly themselves in every scene. And that's exactly how I think people on the spectrum should be represented in media. Not as a burden to others, not treating their autism as a quote-unquote big deal, but just proudly being themselves. Our next suggestion was Bluey and Bingo Healer, autism coded. These two were suggested a lot, but I'm sorry, I wish I could say the most popular kids streaming show in America had autistic representation, but personally I just don't see it in Bingo or Bluey. For me, it's a bit like claiming that Lilo from Lilo and Stitch are on the spectrum. They were another frequent recommendation.
Lilo is hyperactive. It's more likely she's got ADHD.
Yeah, at most I see Lilo, Bingo and Bluey as ADHD. But even then, Bingo and Bluey are like 4. Of course they're going to be wild and full of energy.
Dad, give me something to whack it with. Okay.
And at 4, they're comfortably able to speak to other kids and adults.
What's the time, Mrs. Wolf? 7 o'clock.
As I said, I'm autistic, and when I was 4 years old, I could barely speak to anyone, even my mum.
Most of the time when I asked you how you were doing, you would say, I like Sonic, or I like Ninja Turtles.
I like turtles.
Bingo I could potentially see as a little on the spectrum, like she's less socially outgoing than her sister.
Sometimes you play a bit too rough with me.
But again, she can have a relatively normal conversation with her parents. That would be insane for an autistic 4-year-old. Compare these two to Carl the Collector, a PBS character who was written to be on the spectrum. Unlike Carl, Bingo and Bluey's eye contact is actually really good for 4-year-old kids. Look at Carl. When he tends to be looked at by other people, he tends to look away or shift his eyes. And Bingo and Bluey are more than happy to play and communicate their feelings with other kids. They have a wide variety of hobbies and interests. They don't seem to get exhausted by sound and visual stimuli, and they seem to have more social energy than their parents. For me, they tick the mark as neurotypical in almost every way I can see. For kids on the spectrum, that basic social development takes a while. Honestly though, if you do see Bingo and Bluey as on the spectrum, obviously that's fine, code whoever you want. But I would love to better understand why people think they're on the spectrum. About the best I got was I acted like them when I was 4.
The challenge with saying kids like Bluey are on the spectrum is it runs close to the damaging myth that we're all a little autistic, and that's wrong. It takes away from the challenges that autistic kids and their families have. Bluey and Bingo have lots of friends they socialise with and understand how they feel. That implies theory of mind. It is so far from the kid who is never invited to birthday parties.
Exactly. Having said that, if you do identify with Bingo and Bluey, I totally get that. And it sure would be nice if Bluey and Bingo were representations of people on the spectrum. I just don't see it myself. Our next autistic coded character is Butters. There's been quite a few people that code Butters as autistic, and to be fair, I can see where they're coming from. He speaks in that slightly warbly way that reminds me of some kids on the spectrum.
Whoa, I'm feeling kind of bowling ballish, fellas.
Is that how I sound? I think I sound like Butters. Anyway, he has that social uncertainty. He struggles to keep friends and fit in. And I related a weird amount to him making an alter ego as Professor Chaos. Is that what Dark Strider's saying? Staying on topic. The big issue I have is his behavior could also be seen as a response to his strict and abusive parents. But we'll discuss that shortly. I think the social awkwardness of Butters is part of why I've always connected with the guy. Plus, he's just a genuinely nice person who wears his heart on his shoulder. I think that was why he was my favorite character back when I used to watch the show. But let's not go into that today. At times, he certainly can act socially inappropriately. He's a character where if someone convinces him a behavior is normal, he's often willing to try it. And he's often a social outcast, so I think a lot of people on the spectrum can relate to him as school. I know I did. I relate to Butters a lot more than Daria because he's always trying. But Butters' autism is very open for interpretation. I mean, in one episode, Stan was diagnosed with autism. Again, weirdly relatable episode. Anyway, the problem is, Butters' parents are so abusive that it's hard to tell if his behavior is due to his autism or if it's due to trauma. His parents have literally beaten him with Cartman listening with glee at the end of one episode. And his mum has directly tried to off him, leaving him in the car as it drives into the water. He's constantly manipulated by the 4 main boys, and all of this has no doubt had a damaging psychological impact. I really hope that as an adult, he gets to unpack all of this with a psychologist. But what I admire in Butters is that despite all the horrors that happen around him, he's still always trying to consider others, and not just thinking about his own needs. He's constantly trying to help people, and that is so damn cool and admirable. If he's convinced that doing something stupid will help other people, he'll bloody do it. Screw social norms. He's one of the few characters in the show with a genuine kindness that isn't constantly mocked. I admire the crap out of Butters, and that's why he was my friend next to me for so many years before I separated myself from South Park. Honestly, if you do interpret Butters as autistic and you connect with him, no judgment here. I did, I totally get it. Even years after I walked away from the show, Butters and Wendy remain my favorite characters. Our next community choice was Daffy Duck. Well, given the amount of attention Daffy got as autism coded, I think he's well worth talking about. But I am hesitant to make the link of Daffy being autistic, because on one hand, Daffy does show signs of autism such as struggling with volume control, and emotional management can be a challenge for him. And socially, he does struggle to fit in. He can't even get people to like him. They don't even clap for him when he enters a stadium.
Thank you! Thank you! Very funny. Let's all laugh at the duck.
But on the other hand, Daffy also shows signs of narcissism, and I really don't want to merge together autism and narcissism. According to Mayo Clinic, narcissism traits include
an inflated sense of self-importance, a deep need for admiration, and a lack of empathy for others.
And that does sound a lot like Daffy to me. What do you think, Mum?
In my own experience, I haven't seen an inflated sense of self-importance more frequently in autistic people, but there are exceptions. And unlike narcissistic personalities, people with autism don't typically manipulate others. That would imply theory of mine.
I've definitely seen that self-importance in some, but I've seen it in buckets of neurotypical people too. Next up, we have Lisa Simpson. This was one of the toughest choices on the list, because I've got strong arguments for and against Lisa being autistic, but Lisa was recommended a lot. In fact, when I asked Professor Atwood if his patients had cartoon characters they related to, he immediately mentioned autistic women often related to Lisa Simpson. My first reaction was, of course she isn't, but the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't decide. She's socially awkward, struggles to keep friends, has high expectations for the few friends she manages, and has a very black and white moral code.
Prohibition may be unpopular, but it's the law.
She can also be very hyper-focused on her interests, so it's no wonder people speculate she might be. But as far as I can find, there's never been any official confirmation Lisa is on the autism spectrum. I guess the reason I threw this idea away is I've watched this show for a good 30 years. And it just never occurred to me that Lisa might be on the spectrum. But I think that's because Lisa is just Lisa. She's never really been defined by a diagnosis. But I just can't fully trust my opinion on this, so let's ask a woman on the spectrum. Hey Mum, what do you think?
Look, I'd love Lisa to be on the spectrum. She's bookish and always struggles to keep friends, and she follows those black and white morals without fail.
Millions of girls will grow up thinking that this is the right way to act.
I identified with Lisa a lot in the 90s, but back then it was almost unheard of for women to be diagnosed. One of Lisa's heroes, Marie Curie, was never diagnosed until she had long passed away. Lisa is the type of girl you'll find in almost every school, but until only recently, those girls never got a diagnosis.
But sometimes it kind of bugs me that Lisa's so super intelligent.
But Josh, I've always told you, every genius is autistic, but not every autistic person is a genius.
That's really good. I like that. But with so little female autistic representation, I don't like to encourage that myth that all people on the spectrum are incredibly gifted, because you shouldn't have to define yourself as intelligent because you're on the spectrum. Smart or not, you should just be able to be you. I consider the real Jim's an expert on Simpson's law. But when I asked him if he thought Lisa might be autistic, he said it hadn't occurred to him. This is because her social struggles have rarely been focused on her end, so it wasn't due to her difficulty socializing that caused her to not keep friends. But Jim's felt it was a valid interpretation given Lisa's passionate interest in music and the arts. Another good argument on Lisa not being autistic is she tends to be very emotionally aware, and she doesn't have difficulty ever expressing her feelings.
Do you remember when you lost your passion for this work?
If she's upset at her parents or brother, she will freaking tell them. In fact, if she's upset at the whole town, she'll stand up at the town hall and tell them.
It's gotta be little Lisa Simpson, Springfield's answer to a question no one asked!
And she often has a calm, well thought out, witty, sarcastic response to many situations.
just when I was getting over my Chester A arthritis.
And some people may disagree with this point, but she doesn't seem to be exhausted by being in social situations.
This is true. After dealing with crowded places, I can often come back home exhausted, just needing to escape and be in a quiet room without other people.
Me too. I often just want to go into a dark, quiet room.
Yeah, me too. Some days I just can't do crowded places. There's another issue which doesn't seem to happen to every person on the spectrum, but she doesn't respond badly to high stimuli like light or sound, which is something that I personally can really struggle with.
Lisa also shows signs of generalised anxiety and even obsessive-compulsive symptoms. She's identified her mum as obsessive-compulsive, so genetically she might have got it from her.
Realistically, Lisa's a character with 36 years of different writers behind her, and personally, I doubt any secret note was given to the writers that she needs to be written as a woman on the spectrum. But in the early 90s, when Lisa was written, it was barely understood that women could be on the spectrum. Yet Lisa was the character that so many undiagnosed autistic women identified with.
In my head, Lisa Simpson is definitely on the spectrum, and if other women out there can relate to that, I totally agree.
Next up, we have Hank Hill. Hank was commonly recommended as someone on the autism spectrum, and I can definitely see why many people think so. He speaks in a quite monotone voice.
I'm gonna kick your ass, then I'm gonna reenact kicking your ass.
And this is something that Tony mentioned as a common trait for people on the spectrum. Honey, how would a professor say it?
There may be a lack of vocal tone and volume to indicate emotion and key words.
Thanks, honey. Someone who suggested Hank said they thought Hank Hill was autistic because he gets uncomfortable around sex.
You don't have to worry about me because I'm never gonna have sex.
Oh, Bobby, now don't say that.
But honestly, I disagree with this being a trait for many people on the spectrum. I found a lot of people in the autism community are actually much more open and accepting of sexuality than many neurotypical people. The National Library of Medicine even found this in a study. How cool is that? It's just fascinating. I mean, have you ever seen the Sonic community? We're an interesting bunch. And to avoid being flagged, I'll leave the conversation at that. Back on the subject of Hank, people also mention they think he's autistic because he's constantly honest.
Hank, when was the last time you took a day off?
Well, I took a day off when Bobby was born, but I wasn't really sick. I meant to tell you, it just slipped my mind. I did come in that Saturday.
And I do definitely see that. He can be very practical and to the point.
So, are you Chinese or Japanese?
Hank also has a hyper-focus on propane and propane accessories, and while not everyone on the spectrum is monotone and overly practical, I've met many people on the spectrum very similar to Hank Hill, so I agree with this suggestion. Our next choice is Tina Belcher from Bob's Burgers. I talked about this one with a few people, and yeah, Tina shows a lot of common traits on the spectrum. But knowing Bob's family and how poor they are, it's hard to imagine Bob being able to afford to take his kids to a psychologist, hopefully at least a doctor. But it's understandable given how little money they have. I doubt they could afford to get her officially diagnosed.
She's autistic. She can't help it.
Yeah, I'm autistic.
Bob, just a sec. No, you're not autistic, Tina.
Honestly, I go back and forth on this line as to whether it confirms she is or confirms she's not. But at the end of the day, she shows so many traits, it's hard not to consider her autistic. I mean, on the DSM-5 alone, she shows traits of repetitive behaviors, impaired social interaction, restrictive interests, like butts.
This is too much, actually. I'm coming back.
And while I wouldn't say she has an impairment in speech, she speaks in a fairly monotone voice.
Do I look just like Tammy? This is Tina talking, not Tammy.
I know who you are.
The thing is, every person in the Belcher family shows some autism traits. And to be fair, autism is genetic, so Tina could have inherited autism from Bob or Linda. Bob particularly. Bob has a similar monotone voice and often sees things very literally. It's basically a running joke with him. He also really struggles with interacting with customers.
But I want to talk about this amazing burger.
Oh, sure, but how do we do this? Do I start or do you? Oh my god, am I messing this up?
And it's a huge deal on the rare occasions he does think he's made a friend.
Do you want wine? We have wine. I bought it.
Okay.
It was sort of expensive. It was wine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah.
Take it down a notch.
Okay.
Louise arguably shows more traits of ADHD, but I mostly tend to notice how smart and creative she is. I can't list exact traits for Linda, either, but she does strike me as a very quirky, extroverted person on the spectrum. Of all the family members, Jean probably shows sensory overload the most. For example, Jean was overwhelmed by the volume at a concert Bob took him to. It could even be argued that Tina stims when she does her verbal I just seriously doubt Bob has ever had the money to get his daughter tested for autism.
I'm a smart, strong, sensual woman.
Oh god.
One thing I appreciate with Tina is she doesn't meet any of the eye-rolling stereotypes I know from many stereotypical characters on the spectrum like Sheldon. She's not super academically gifted either. I'm not going to say Tina isn't intelligent, but she does very subpar in school. And frankly, so did I. I did worse.
You're the baddest girl in detention, Tina.
Tell me about it, stud.
There was just too much else going on in my head, and I was never able to do schoolwork very well. I wouldn't call either of us stupid, but school just isn't the best proving grounds for many people on the spectrum. When she socializes with other characters at school, it often feels like she's just performing whatever dance she has to learn in order to get closer to Jimmy Jr. I really relate to the way she just wants to be part of the group, but just can't fit in. The way she can just drift off in thought occasionally. They're all traits I've been challenged by my whole life. Unlike some of the worst autism-coded characters like an atypical, it's being on the spectrum without screaming for attention. It's simply allowing the person to exist and not making them defined by their diagnosis.
Like sometimes Ms. Jacobson doesn't erase the chalkboard that well and I can see what was on there the day before and it's like being in 2 moments of time at once and it hurts my head.
This is the exact kind of tiny observational quirk that would bug me in school as well. In fact, I distinctly remember the chalkboard not being fully erased and it just bugging me. It often took all my self-discipline to not go and properly erase it myself. I've prattled on, but of all the characters on this list, Tina is among the most relatable to me.
Tina talks like this. Dina talks like this. I'm finally gonna get to ride a real horse.
Wow, I'm really happy for you.
Our next confirmed autistic character is Max from Mary and Max. Mary and Max is a 2009 claymation movie that I still remember really well. Mary and Max are two pen pals who are vastly different people, in vastly different stages of their life. Mary is an inquisitive, kind young girl still learning about the world.
It would be great if you could write back and be my friend.
And Max is a man on the spectrum who mostly likes to keep to himself.
I don't like crowds, bright lights, sudden noises, or strong smells. New York has all these.
Max has been considered one of the better confirmed autistic characters, and the movie has won multiple awards. There's one scene that Max has in particular that just connected with me so much. It might sound like a weird scene to relate to, but there's a scene where he struggles with emotional management and basically has his own version of a meltdown. His frustration just gets too much and he gets furious at someone with a cigarette. Just the sheer white-hot rage he felt, and it all just getting too much for him, was so relatable. I just connected with this scene so much.
I do not understand why people break laws.
But then he realizes what he's doing and walks away. When Mary grows up, she tries to use Max as an ambassador for autism, but Max doesn't like how she's representing it, which I totally get. Max discusses in his story how he wanted autism to be represented, not just solely as a disability, but also as a quirk that is a part of who we are.
I do not feel disabled, defective, or a need to be cured. I like being an Aspie.
And yeah, I connected with that. But also, don't throttle people on the bus even if they smoke. I mean, I freaking hate smoking too, but just, walk away.
Because my mind is very literal and logical.
Next up, we have Phillip J Fry. Honestly, I couldn't find Fry autism coded by that many people on the internet, but someone in my community did suggest Fry as autism coded, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought, oh yeah, he could totally be on the spectrum. But honestly, I also get if people disagree with this. It's a running joke that Fry is not very intelligent, and a lot of his odd quirks may just be chalked up to the writers pointing out how stupid he is. That being said, I personally think I see a lot of autism traits in Fry that are completely unrelated to his intelligence. Fry is a cartoon character who simply doesn't get social nuance and can often take a literal interpretation with what he's thinking, and he can get very hyper-focused on certain topics or things. He can often see things differently to other people, and he struggles to make friends. For example, in the episode Teenage Mutant Leela's Hurdles, Fry goes down to see Leela in the sewers. And one of the mutants asks if Fry is too unpopular on the surface, so he has to go down into the sewers. And Fry indicates this is true. It's a cute joke, but growing up I related a lot to Fry saying that. In the episode where Fry shows he's a big Star Trek fan, he indicates that growing up he felt alone, but watching Star Trek made him feel less alone. In fact, I'd argue part of the reason why Fry connects with Leela is they both know what it's like to be the outcast. And throughout the series, he really struggles to communicate with Leela, as much as he really wants to. The episode Devil's Hands Are Idle Playthings is a good example of this, where Fry can't communicate what he feels about Leela through verbal communication, so he sets up a concert to express it. Professor Atwood mentions that people on the spectrum can often take a literal interpretation of things, and I've certainly seen Fry do that in his conversations with Leela.
I'll remember you in here.
I wish I could remember with my boobs.
It's hard to have a more literal interpretation than that. In the episode where Fry has worms, he originally just couldn't manage the social grace to get Leela's attention. Though I'd argue he shouldn't have to have the social grace if she's the right person for him. But I'd argue the episode recognizes this, and that's why Fry boots out the worms. And I think as the seasons progress, Leela comes to like Fry for who he is. A big issue Leela had with Fry in the first movie was that he was so socially immature. And his checkbook has the Hulk in it. But she liked future Fry, aka Lars, a lot more because he was socially more mature. Fry matures slowly, and those 10 to 15 years gave him time to mature to where Leela fell in love with him. The point I'm making is that social immaturity is a common trait of many people on the autism spectrum. Once again, if we look at the DSM-5, we can see impairments in social interaction is a common trait. Obviously, this doesn't excuse that Fry can be an inconsiderate jerk at times, but I can relate to some of his struggles in daily life, you know? Fry also wears his heart on his shoulder, and I can really relate to that. If he feels something is wrong, he'll say it. Another weird thing I related to is he kind of struggles to hold down a job. Again, this isn't every person on the spectrum, but maintaining an employment for many people on the spectrum can be difficult in traditional jobs. I mentioned this source in my previous video on autism, but the Australian Bureau of Statistics found that only 40% of autistic people are employed. And in America, it's worse. Forbes reports that only 32% of adults with autism were employed, compared to over 70% of neurotypical adults. And I struggled with holding down a job for so many years. It's part of why I've held on so dearly to my job here on YouTube for 11 years. That all being said, it is a constant running joke that Fry is not smart. So maybe Fry is just stupid, but I related to him a lot in the past, and that's up for your interpretation.
Icy wiener? Oh, crud.
Our next autistic character is Carl the Collector. Adults on the spectrum have a tendency to mask some of their autism traits, but with kids, it often takes a lot less speculation to figure out they're on the spectrum. I could immediately tell that Carl was autistic. The way he moves, the way his eyes shift. There's no retrospective discussion happening of Carl years later from the creators where they're saying like, yeah, he's autistic. From the start, Carl the Collector is a cartoon where the main character is on the spectrum.
I can build a track with blocks from my block collection.
But the first thing I noticed is actually kind of a weird thing.
Hold still, Sheldon.
I also carry a paper towel with me, because as Carl just shows, a paper towel has 1,000,001 handy uses.
You carry some paper towel in your pocket everywhere we go.
Carl the Collector is actually voiced by a person on the spectrum.
He's also autistic, which I am too.
It shouldn't surprise me that much, but sadly it does. Because for some reason, this has been a huge difficulty in film and television for years.
Yes, please, with hot sauce.
But I've heard this way of speaking from so many kids on the spectrum over the years. He's a little professor, you know?
You have also sold 4 black and white bowls.
A big thing I appreciate is, unlike a show like atypical, Carl isn't just portrayed as a burden upon his family and friends. He's instead shown to have his own personal strengths and his own unique challenges. Even Wild Brain Caillou effectively portrayed autism in episodes. How has freaking Caillou managed decent autistic representation when way bigger budget streaming shows have botched it up so terribly? There's some beautiful tiny details in this show, like when we see Carl quietly stimming. They don't make a big deal of it, it's just there. And we can see when he's given too much eye contact, he'll shift his eyes away, which again is 110% what I did and still often do. No one in the show is drawing huge attention to these details, it's just who Carl is. These behaviors are a part of Carl. The world doesn't need to stop to pay attention to him, Carl can just be one of the kids. If only my mum were still with us today to see how far autistic representation has come.
I'm right here, you doofus. And yes, this is certainly a step up in representation from Sheldon.
Another thing I appreciate is the colors, music, and sound are gentler than many other cartoons I've seen. Kinda reminds me of my favorite kids cartoon, Puffin Rock. Very good for a chill watch. The colors just perfectly suit me, love that show. And as Tony has mentioned as a common trait, Carl has a tendency to take a literal interpretation of things. Like when his mum says,
"Funny you should say it's perfect."
He asks,
"Why is that funny?"
"Yeah, Mum, why is that funny?"
I don't think it's actually ha-ha funny. I guess it's like a figure of speech. Funny in this case means coincidental, that you should mention that.
Then why don't they just say it's coincidental you should mention that?
Look, I don't know. The English language is weird.
Next up, we have Fred from Scooby Doo Mystery Incorporated. This Fred is just a delight. In the original series, Fred was kind of the confident extrovert, but in Mystery Incorporated, the writers confirm he's on the spectrum, and they've made him an interesting and flawed character to lead the team. What's cool is you can clearly tell Fred has empathy. Unlike Rick, he cares deeply about his friends, but he doesn't always know how to express his emotions or what to say to help. And he just doesn't always pick up on social cues. Like, he kinda gets that Daphne has a crush on him, but he doesn't really know how to react to it. A bit like Fry, he doesn't know how to express his feelings. What they show with Fred is that some adults on the spectrum can't always fully understand why they're feeling upset.
I'm sorry, gang, I've just got all of these crazy emotions and I don't know why.
While certainly not every autistic adult has meltdowns, Fred and I both get anxiety attacks, and at times, Scooby serves as his comfort animal, and it's beautiful. It's almost like they actually consulted with people on the spectrum. I also appreciate that throughout the series, Fred tries to learn to verbalize his feelings.
But I'm also not going to hide the fact that I have feelings for Traps and you.
There's moments in the show he expresses he doesn't fully get how society expects him to act, but he tends to follow what he feels is the kind thing to do, and I just so connect with that. He can also be very literal in what he says, which again is an autistic trait we've seen mentioned. And once again, I have an example of me having this issue as well. In the past, when people used to occasionally say, "Love is the most powerful force in the universe," my brain would immediately think, "No, it isn't. Gravity is the most powerful force in the universe." Or when people say something goes on forever, I think, "No, it won't. It'll go on till the heat death of the universe in 100 trillion years or 1 Google years." A bit like Spongebob in his first movie, Fred can have a very simple perception of what a quote-unquote man should be. And he can feel insecure because he's very sensitive, which sadly is sometimes seen in society as not manly. I wanted to compare Fred directly after Carl because these are two good examples of canon autistic characters, and the common differences between an adult on the spectrum and a child. Fred's certainly level 1 autism, and he's able to fortunately maintain friends who support him in being the best person he can be. It's a case of making a previously not so interesting character more interesting in modern times. Plus, it's nice to have a badass, butt-kicking character on the spectrum. Don't get me wrong, I love my SpongeBobs, but it's also nice to have an example of how competent autistic people can be in emergency situations. When the social complications are put aside for 5 minutes for survival, we can be damn focused on our target goals. Also, I gotta say, props to Fred's voice actor, Frank Welker. This guy has actually been voice acting Fred since the original show in 1969. What? Holy cow. This guy has played Fred for 56 years. Freaking props for his dedication to the role. Fred is one of my favorite characters on the spectrum in cartoons. He's not just a guy on the spectrum, he's Fred, and he is by far the least obnoxious, most charming Fred I've seen on the internet. Okay, I'm on page 23 of this script. That should be nearly all of our choices, and gee, I respect you, and I respect my patrons who have kept me here, many of whom are on the spectrum. So I'm going to do my best to do your choices justice. Let's continue. Our next autism-coded character is Peridot from Steven Universe. Oh, for goodness sake, why is this still autism-coded and not confirmed by the show itself? People love Peridot for her autistic traits. Show some freaking guts. Peridot being autistic is a well-known headcanon, particularly within the autistic community, and I don't blame anyone who agrees that Peridot's on the spectrum. She struggles with volume control, and initially she struggles with social interaction. She can also be very blunt and take things very literally.
There hasn't been one instance of correct behavior exhibited by any one of these crystal gems.
Ruby was also suggested as autism-coded. I've seen Pearl suggested too. Ruby particularly, though, seemed to resonate with a lot of people on the spectrum. People normally indicate this was because of her struggle with emotional regulation. The tricky part I had was that Ruby's so rarely in the show that I could not read her behavior much. Honestly, I just saw her as a hothead, but that's just me. But if you feel she's on the spectrum, feel free to tell me why she relates to you. Our next confirmed autistic character is Julia from Sesame Street. Julia arrived at Sesame Street back in 2015, and she's very much confirmed to be on the autism spectrum.
She does things just a little differently, in a Julia sort of way.
Oh.
Julia's only 4, so her autism traits show very clearly. She's still growing, and masking hasn't even occurred to her yet. I personally speculate Julia is probably level 2 autism, as she can communicate a little bit, but generally she speaks in 1 to 2 words.
Maybe you need to get a haircut, Julia, huh? No. Oh, Elmo thinks that's a no.
By comparison, I'm level 1 autism, and at her age, I couldn't do social interaction well, but I could speak a little more than that. But just for funsies, let's run through the DSM-5 autism traits, as Julia basically ticks every box. Repetitive behaviors? Yep, she's got plenty of them. Impaired social interaction? Well, duh. Sensory fixations on a particular object? Well, I'd say she has her rabbit fluffster. Impairments in speech? 110%. Discomfort in eye contact? Yes, indeed. That last one's from Tony, but still, helpful indicator. And unlike many characters on the spectrum, there was originally strong consultation with the Autism Self-Advocacy Network to make sure Julia accurately captured a child on the spectrum, and respects for that. That being said, Sesame Street did really botch up at one point by associating with Autism Speaks. This caused the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network to drop ties with Sesame Workshop. I don't know the full story, but I personally have the benefit of the doubt for Sesame Workshop. I don't think they knew how poorly Autism Speaks has been advocacies for autism. Anyway, I personally don't think this takes away from Julia being an awesome autistic character.
Isn't that right, Julia?
Right.
Our next autism-coded character is Star Butterfly from Star vs. the Forces of Evil, which I'm just going to call SVTFOE, which is still too long.
Triangle.
Star was recommended in some lovely fan art by Zoe, and I have seen this speculation discussed among some of the Star fandom. This was among my favorite cartoons in the 2010s, and it's also on my very biased and outdated top 10 best modern cartoons. And I do get why some fans speculate Star is autistic.
It's my name. With a star inside of a butterfly and 2 hearts and a spider.
Star definitely struggles with volume control all the time.
Bye, new friends! See you tomorrow! Bye!
And she can take things very literally. I also noticed she doesn't always register when a character's sad, upset, or just struggling. This Tumblr post even mentions that she stims by flapping her hands and chewing her wand. Personally to me, Star reminds me much more of someone who has ADHD. She's forgetful, she daydreams, she can be disorganized, and she can take a lot of risks. And these are very common traits in someone with ADHD. That being said, she could also be AuDHD, as some people like to call it, as ADHD and autism are commonly diagnosed together in a person. Our next autism-coded character, I don't know how she's not confirmed, is Daria. She has a mixed reputation, but most of us knew Daria back in the 90s. She has very black and white thinking. I often wonder the kind of lady she would have turned into. Her voice is ridiculously monotone.
Do you ever feel like maybe you are wasting your life?
Only when I'm awake.
She does socially struggle, but you could also argue that she's not necessarily socially struggling, just choosing not to conform.
I'm the misery chick. But I'm not miserable. I'm just not like them.
I personally think, though, she's just not a very nice person. In fact, I distinctly remember watching her as an autistic kid in the 90s and wondering, why is she so awful to everyone? She's outright rude to many people, even family that's trying to help her like her mum. I related far more to characters on the spectrum who actually put in the effort to people reaching out to them. Daria is the polar opposite in personality to autistic people like Spongebob. And growing up, I related far more to Spongebob, because he is happier not being socially normal and just does his own thing. But he also doesn't look down on the world for the way they act like Daria does. Honestly, they're a very interesting contrast. Anyway, moving on. Our next choice is Phineas and Ferb, who are autism-coded. A lot of people seem to think these two might be on the spectrum. I mostly saw two quirky, highly intelligent inventors. Some people point to Phineas having a hyper-focus on building elaborate contraptions. Some people think this is his special interest. Another thing people point to is how socially oblivious Phineas is to Isabella's crush on him. Phineas seems to have a very narrow emotional range. He's mostly keeping that flat tone and rarely doing strong emotional reactions.
Okay, we're getting a slight late start because of the broken wing, but here's the whole route, with stops in Tokyo and Paris to refuel.
Which I admit, I can relate to. His brother Ferb has also been autism-coded. From my limited understanding, this is mostly because of his selective mutism. What about you? Do you think Phineas and Ferb are autistic? Here's an unusual choice, Ariel from The Little Mermaid. She's been autism-coded. Like Star, I see a lot more ADHD in Ariel rather than autism. Once again, she's very prone to risk-taking, even giving up her voice in order to explore the surface. And as an autistic child, I watched that and always thought, I could never do that. It's just like, no, too big a risk. Another thing that occurred to me is she could also have OCD, as she shows symptoms of hoarding with her rather large collection of shiny objects. Basically, hoarding disorder is when someone continually struggles to discard possessions. Honestly, this one's a long shot. Ariel could be perfectly neurotypical. Personally, my preferred headcanon is Ariel is ADHD, because ADHD is very manageable with the right support. Hoarding is, well, it can wreck people. We're off topic, let's move on. Our next autism-coded character is... No, wait, he's confirmed. Oh yeah. Our next confirmed autistic character is Donatello from Rise of TMNT. They don't come around often, gotta get excited. Much like Entraptor, Donatello was confirmed to be autistic by the show's creators. And much like Entraptor, he's a bit of a quirky inventor. We do see some autistic traits like some sensory sensitivity, and he seems to struggle to relate to other people's emotions. And of course, he has that hyper-focus on special interests. And as is the modern writing custom, that fixation is tech. I mean, which I get, but we just could use a bit of a mix-up there. Never happy, am I?
Be happy.
And oh, Donnie, my friend, I can relate so much to this line.
Okay, guys, say magic is just an illusion, science is superior. All right, that's a great one.
Our next choice is Rick from Rick and Morty. The show's confirmed Rick is on the spectrum with a quick line when he was playing Minecraft.
Is this game popular with autistic people? Why would you say something like that? Because I'm starting to love it.
I also noticed Rick on the list of autistic fictional characters on Wikipedia. And I think I've noticed Rick has a few autism traits, but I think Rick has much bigger issues than autism, such as severe depression. In terms of his autism, I've definitely seen him avoid eye contact, and he can certainly get hyper-focused on his science and exploration. He can also have a very black and white way of seeing the universe without much room for moral grey. I've also heard some people speculate his wubba-lubba-dub-dub catchphrase is him verbally stimming.
Wubba-lubba-dub-dub!
Though personally I think that phrase is more just to troll the audience or memify the show. Another common autistic trait can be struggling with theory of mind, aka feeling what it's like to be in someone else's shoes, and Rick definitely struggles with theory of mind, with Morty and his daughter Beth being one of the many examples of people he just fails to understand. Though a question we'll come to is, does he fail to understand them or does he not want to? He seems to find relationships exhausting, and instead of talking about his anxiety, isolation, and depression, he seems to reject talking to people about his feelings and isolate himself within his science projects. Yeah, they're amazing to see in action and result in some incredible adventures. But at the same time, many would probably agree Rick is a very socially maladjusted person. A good example would be him turning himself into a pickle to avoid attending therapy. Yeah, a cool to watch action-packed episode, but also kinda sad when you think about it. That being said, I don't think Rick being autistic is the same as him being amoral and severely depressed. A lot of Rick's behavior is hard to read, because his behavior is so heavily affected by severe alcoholism, depression, and possibly psychopathy. Though sadly, depression is very common for people with autism. For example, a 2019 meta-analysis found that approximately 40% of autistic adults had depression. But as for Rick's amorality, Rick just seems to lack mirror neurons, which is not a specific autistic trait. A way to test your mirror neurons is when you see someone fall over or get hurt. You hopefully feel uncomfortable with that person's suffering, and Rick seems to display no discomfort with the brutal death and suffering of many other sentient animals. My brother Raz, who's also on the spectrum, made an interesting argument to me that Rick does not lack theory of mind, because Rick is rarely confused by others not agreeing with him. In fact, he frequently gives verbal summaries of other characters' positions when they disagree with him. In this way, Rick shows he knows what's going on in other people's minds. He just doesn't give a crap. Instead, that's more likely to indicate a sociopath. And I think Raz had a really good point on this. In fact, the creator of the show, Dan Harmon, has previously called Rick a drunken sociopath. But if this is another case where Rick gives people some comfort as a symbol for being on the spectrum, who am I to judge? I think the average adult can tell the difference between being on the autism spectrum and being a drunken sociopath. And I think some fans connect with Rick's struggles and depression and his challenges connecting with others, which is perfectly fair. Our next confirmed choice is Preston from Family Guy. No one will probably remember this guy except me, but I'm a modern Family Guy fan, so I enjoy whenever Preston plays a role in an episode.
I'm 11 seconds late. I'll credit you the time in our 2-minute break in 180 minutes.
He's Peter's new boss, and he's confirmed himself to be on the spectrum while discussing his love of trains.
I spent the morning enjoying all 4 Monopoly Railroad properties. I love trains. I'm on the spectrum.
And he's one of my favorite representations of someone on the spectrum because he shows he can be very successful and productive, but still struggle with social norms on a daily basis. He also struggles with OCD, which is a nice representation for me as I'm both autistic and OCD.
My OCD won't allow me to stop clicking until the cabin has 15 towels.
And at times it is a difficult combination to live with. Anyway, great representation, moving on. Our next confirmed character is Norma from Dead End, Paranormal Park. Norma's experience of being autistic is a reflection of the show's creator, Hamish Steele. They don't directly describe Norma as autistic in the show, but it's very clear she's on the spectrum through her anxiety, hyper-focus on a special interest.
Will we be doing the original starter tour or the slightly revised starter tour 2.0, which includes the customer service simulator?
And confusion over social rules. Plus, she can have a very literal interpretation of things. Paranormal Park is a quiet gem on Netflix that wasn't met with much traffic, but its 2 seasons has some legitimately funny and clever writing. Our next autism-coded characters are Dipper and Mable Pines from Gravity Falls. I've seen these 2 autism coded, but sometimes it's mixed, with Dipper being coded as autistic, while his sister Mable is coded as ADHD.
There's a carpetbagger in the turnip cellar.
Well, Hornswoggle might have her sack.
And yeah, Dipper's social struggles and awkwardness definitely did resonate with me. And he can be very hyper-focused on the journals he found and the town's mysteries, of which Gravity Falls has plenty. While Mable does show ADHD traits, I can also see some autism traits in her too. Once again, she's a character who struggles with volume control. Something else that's interesting is she only wears sweaters, which could well be due to sensory issues. I like the idea that these twins both show the many different autism traits people can have. But like many shows, this has never been confirmed. But personally, I see plenty of reasons to headcanon these 2 as on the spectrum. Our next autism-coded character is Bruno from Encanto.
We don't talk about Bruno, no.
Bruno was suggested by a few people, and he's certainly a quirky fellow, but personally, I disagree that Bruno's on the spectrum. The poor guy has spent years isolated, and the movie is trying to portray that Bruno is quirky after all the time he's spent isolated. In fact, he probably has severe trauma and mental health challenges from spending years locked alone in the walls with only rats to talk to. They don't talk about Bruno, but maybe they should have for his own health and well-being.
I think that's the point the movie is trying to make.
Yeah, I guess. He might be on the autism spectrum, but I think he has much bigger issues to work out before we start labeling him as autistic. Our next confirmed character is Billy and Mandy from the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy. The creator of the show, Maxwell Adams, confirmed the characters were autistic retroactively in 2021. Apparently, Billy, Mandy, and Grimm are all on the autism spectrum. As Maxwell was diagnosed later in life, he portrayed parts of his autism in each character. Mandy was the cold, rational way he learned to live in order to survive, while Billy portrayed the fun and joyous inner world where Maxwell liked to spend his time. And yeah, I really relate to both those things. Sometimes I've just got to escape and I'm having more of a fun time from that inner world I build around me. But escapism is like candy, it's best in small doses. Interestingly, he states that Grimm represents the moral mediator between those two sides of his autism. Watching the show as a kid, I definitely connected with Mandy.
Our next cupcake.
Good. I'm in the mood for calamari.
But Billy I mostly saw as a not-so-bright kid, and by not so bright I mean stupid.
You're stupid!
Kind of like Patrick from Spongebob. But hey, I'll always find it refreshing to hear some representation from a person actually on the autism spectrum. Our next autism-coded character is Wallace from Wallace and Gromit. A couple of people recommended Wallace, and I think there's a fair argument to be made he's on the spectrum. It was suggested that his special interests might be cheese and his inventions.
No cheese, Gromit.
And yeah, I could definitely see cheese being his fixation. I mean, this guy scrapes lunar rocks off the moon and eats them because he thinks they look like cheese.
Wensleydale.
And he does seem to preference cheese over any other food, and limited food choices can be common for people on the spectrum. There's so much to be said on that subject, but we're already covering so much, let's move on. Another good point is Wallace can have trouble reading the room. He also has a tendency to shake his hands in a way that some people interpret as stimming. I'm not going to go into him being an inventor as making him autistic though, as very few of us on the spectrum are actually genius inventors or obsessed with mechanics. I can't stand mechanics. I can't invent anything. Anyway, some of us just want to play games and enjoy the tech of inventors, and that's fine too. Luce from Our House. To be fair, it seems like almost every character in Our House has at least been coded as neurodivergent, and I certainly get that. I think Our House tends to attract a lot of neurodivergent people. Some have even said it's helped them heal their inner child. I don't fully know what that means, but it's some bold praise. It's a beautiful show, but there are a lot of characters, so let's try and focus on the main character, Luce. Creator and showrunner Dana Terrace has confirmed that Luce is canonically neurodivergent, but she didn't specify where under the neurodivergent umbrella Luce falls. I personally tend to think she's ADHD, but others believe she's ADHD, a common term for being both autistic and ADHD. But other commonly autism-coded characters on Our House include Amity Blight, King Clawthorne, Hootie, Eda, Lilith Clawthorne, Hunter, V, and Luce's mum Camilla. It's a whole discussion for someone who's more experienced with the show than me. Ask me something about SpongeBob and I can almost certainly tell you, but Our House is a show I haven't watched nearly enough of to confidently code any characters. But if you've watched the show, I'd be curious in the comments if you think Luce is on the spectrum. Next up, we have Linus from Peanuts. Linus was recommended, but most people watching this video probably don't even remember Peanuts well. But I grew up with the cartoons, and at times I did identify with Linus. He's knowledgeable, quiet, and very well spoken for his age, and this was something I really related to.
His blanket is used for stress relief, and it makes me wonder if he has sensory issues with touch.
But absolutely no confirmation from Charles M. Schulz. Thanks, Mum, Schultz. But to be fair, he grew up in the 1920s when neurodivergent people were alienated and tossed in mental asylums. He could have been on the spectrum himself for all we know. But staying on topic, Linus may just be a quirky kid. Our next autism-coded character is Wally. 130 likes for Wally. Really? According to the comments,
he's 100% autistic and you cannot change my mind.
Okay, I get he likes to collect stuff and keep his routine, but he's also a robot, and I can't in good conscience compare being on the autism spectrum to being a robot. Mum, do you think Wally's on the spectrum?
Oh, for God's sake, he's a robot. He's not a person, he's a robot.
Yeah, but if Wally does feel autistic to you, feel free to tell me why. And our final character, who is most certainly autism coded, is greased up deaf guy from Family Guy. Oh, you've got to be kidding. 13 people agreed with this choice? Really? It's the greased up deaf guy. What possibly makes him autistic? As far as I can see, we never learn anything about him other than he's greased up, he's deaf, and he has a high-pitched voice. Why?
You're never gonna catch me.
He's funny, I'll give you that, but let me know in the comments what you possibly think makes him on the spectrum and if you actually agree with this. Personally, I'm definitely more in the no category. And with those said, if you're still with me, I'd like to say a few final quick words on these characters. The autistic cartoon characters I respect are the ones that don't just have autism at the center of their life. They aren't solely defined by their diagnosis or their autistic quirks, but instead they're complicated characters with many traits. And I hope we keep pushing for autistic representation in animation. And for Pete's sake, let's get some more autistic actors out there. With that said, thanks for watching and I hope to see you next time. This was a big passion project, so I want to thank my patrons who enabled me to make this project while still allowing me to pay the monthly bills. And an extra thanks to these people in the shoutout tier: Anna Jones, Orstismic, Angel Angeline, 3 Cat Day, The Furry of Fury, Cookie Monster, Shockwave FPS Studios, Miss Arceus, Joseph Bowers, Jordan McCann, Chandler Amethyst, Megan Bruns, Bubbles Dark, The Hug Wizard, Rayan Graves, Saturn Yoshi, William Johnson, Dassin, Joe Ferry, Mewtwo Shadow FNAF Girl, Marty738, and Check It Omega. I was going to read some more Garfield comics, but honestly, I'm at the 3-week mark in producing this video and I've just barely got any words left. I mostly made this video because of my passion for the subject and because I wanted to contribute to the sometimes limited discussion of autistic characters. Oh, but one thing I'd love your opinion on is I'm thinking of doing a travelogue of my hiking or jogs through the mountains. Some people like to do travelogues in cars and buses across the state, but I'd like to do one based on where my own 2 feet have carried me. I want to show you the beautiful views of my second home and tell you the stories I've had there over the last 13 years I've been there. If this idea doesn't sound abysmal to you, let me know. Plus, you know, it's always nice to know if some people actually watch my videos to the end. Hope you're having a pleasant week, and if you're still watching this far, there's a good chance I will see you next week, so see you then.